keeping up with just the sheer volume of information out there, especially presidential stuff, executive orders, it feels like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes,
It
right?
really does. How do you keep track of it all? And more importantly, what does it actually mean?
Exactly. So how do you understand the impact on you without getting totally lost in the details?
Well, that's what we're aiming to do today. We're going deep into this detailed analytical report. It looks at the economic, the political, and, yeah, the socio-cultural fallout from President Trump's executive orders in his second term.
Starting right from January 20th, 2025.
Right. And it's not just a couple of orders. We're talking about 171 of them
Yeah.
as of late July. EO 1 verse 147 up to EO 14317.
Wow.
Yeah. But the report we're using, it focuses on the really key ones, draws on web sources, ex posts, kind of pulls it all together.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission here really is to pull out the absolute must-know points from this report.
Kind of a shortcut.
Yeah, exactly. Your shortcut to getting informed about the impacts these orders are already having and, what might be coming down the line without reading all 101 yourself.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start?
Let's dive right into the economic side first because there are some really big shifts happening there already.
Makes sense. Trade is usually front and center.
Definitely. So first up, trade and tariffs. The report flags a few key EOs, like EO 14257 from April.
Right, the one with the baseline 10% tariff on pretty much all imports.
Exactly. But then much higher tariffs, up to 49%, aimed at countries with big trade imbalances. China's specifically mentioned, of course.
And didn't we also see some earlier ones back in February?
Yeah, EO 14193 and 14194. One tackled the synthetic opioid supply chain from China, and the other closed that de minimis loophole.
Ah, the one that let low-value stuff come in tariff-free, mostly from China, yeah.
Right. And then, interestingly, another order in April, EO 14266, had to actually modify those tariff rates.
To account for retaliation, presumably.
That's what the report suggests, yeah. Adjusting for how trading partners push back.
Okay, so what's fascinating here, or at least how supporters frame it, is that these orders are all about protecting American industries. Making imports less attractive, encouraging domestic production.
Bring manufacturing back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Closing that de minimis loophole, that's a direct shot at, cheap Chinese goods flooding the market. The idea is to boost U.S. manufacturing.
And the report mentions other examples, like cars.
Yeah, things like 25% tariffs on foreign automakers, tariffs on goods from countries importing Venezuelan oil. It's all designed to put American economic interests first. The White House line is pretty clear. Rebuild the economy and restore national and economic security.
Okay, that's the argument for it. But here's where it gets really interesting. What about the potential downsides? What does the report say there?
Well, global leaders are definitely sounding the alarm. Concerns about trade wars, especially, with China.
Which could mess up supply chains.
Big time. And hit consumers here with higher prices. Ian Bremmer from Eurasia Group explicitly warned about a looming U.S.-China trade war.
Right.
And the report notes, like you said, that these tariffs aren't happening in a vacuum. Retaliation is real, hence that EO 14266 needing to tweak the rates.
And economists have predictions.
Yeah. Some predict that a flat 10% universal tariff could push consumer prices up by 1, maybe 2%. And think about small businesses.
The ones relying on imports.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They face higher costs, and where does that usually go? Pass right on to you, the consumer.
So what does this all mean for the future then, if you sort of balance the potential gains against the risks?
Well, you could see some strengthening in specific domestic sectors, steel, maybe automotive. But the big risk, the report suggests, is escalating into wider trade conflicts.
Not just China.
Not just China, potentially the EU too. Now, the focus on reciprocal tariffs might push partners to the negotiating table. That's the hope, maybe.
But if it doesn't work,
then prolonged trade tensions could really weaken global economic stability overall. So the U.S. might get some short-term manufacturing job gains, maybe, but long-term, it could face real headwinds if inflation spikes or if global markets get seriously destabilized. It changes the game.
Okay, let's shift from trade to energy. That's another area with a lot of action.
Definitely.
We've seen orders trying to boost the coal industry again, like EO 14259, fast-tracking permits for fossil fuel projects.
And expanding drilling, right? Alaska.
Yeah, there was an EO declaring a national energy emergency in April related to that, and also one pushing for zero-based regulatory budgeting.
Which basically means cutting
To
regulations.
reduce regulatory barriers.
Okay, so this aligns pretty directly with campaign promises, right? right,
Yeah.
boost U.S. energy production.
Hmm.
And the potential upside, supporters would say, is job creation, especially in states like Texas, Alaska.
Hmm.
And for the energy companies themselves, rolling back environmental rules means lower compliance costs, cheaper to operate, potentially.
But what about the environmental perspective? That's got to be the flip side.
Absolutely. Environmental groups argue these policies will just make climate change worse. And, the long-term economic costs of environmental damage, storms, health issues could dwarf any short-term gains.
Plus, focusing so heavily on fossil fuels.
It could divert investment from renewables, which could hurt U.S. competitiveness down the road, especially as global markets increasingly want greener energy. Trading partners might even penalize U.S. exports if they're seen as too carbon intensive.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's sort of energy independence versus keeping up with global trends towards green energy.
That's a good way to put it. The U.S. could get short-term energy independence, maybe some job growth in those sectors, but the risk is being left behind long-term if the global economy keeps shifting to renewables.
And the environmental costs.
Right. Plus, potential international penalties on high-carbon exports. Those could really offset any gains from just producing more oil and gas domestically. It's a gamble on the future direction of energy.
Okay, one more economic area before we move on. The federal workforce and efficiency.
Ah, yes, the administrative state focus.
Exactly. There was that day one EO establishing a Department of Government Efficiency with some interesting names involved, like Elon Musk, aiming to streamline things.
And then the workforce order shortly after.
Yeah, end of January. Introduced this deferred resignation idea, basically push nonpartisan staff to resign by early February.
Replace them with loyalists.
That was the stated aim, yeah. Replace experienced staff with those seen as more loyal. And there was also a Treasury EO in April trying to eliminate paper checks by September 30th.
To reduce fraud, presumably.
That's the goal.
Okay, so the positive spin on the Department of Government Efficiency is, cutting federal spending, saving potentially billions by trimming bureaucracy, making government leaner, more efficient for taxpayers.
Right. Sounds good on paper. But we're hearing warnings from critics, people like Representative Ilhan Omar. What are their concerns?
Well, the big worry is about purging those nonpartisan civil servants. Critics warn it could seriously disrupt vital services. Think Social Security, think TSA at the airport, things people rely on every day.
Because you're losing experienced people.
Exactly. Replacing experienced staff with appointees chosen mainly for loyalty, not necessarily expertise. That could lead to huge inefficiencies, policy mistakes. It might actually increase costs in the long run.
And the paper checks?
That faces hurdles, too. The report mentions challenges for people who don't have bank accounts, who really depend on those physical checks. It's not a simple switch for everyone.
So this raises a really important question. What about the long-term health of government itself?
That's the core issue. You might get some short-term cost savings, sure, but the deeper potential impact is eroding that institutional knowledge, that expertise built up over years.
Which could undermine the government's ability to actually function.
Precisely, leading to economic disruptions because services aren't delivered properly. And that push for loyalty over expertise. It could deter talented people from even wanting to work in public service down the line. Worsening talent shortages. The risk is fundamentally weakening the government's ability to do its job.
Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's talk political implications. This is where things often get particularly charged.
Understandably so. These orders touch on core political divides.
Definitely. Let's start with immigration and national security, a huge focus area.
Right from day one.
Yeah. EO 1161, January 20th, restricted entry for foreign nationals deemed threats. Suspended immigration from places like Yemen, Burundi.
And then border security orders followed quickly.
Early February, EOs targeting drug flows, enhancing security on both the southern and northern borders. And then there was that order invoking the Alien Enemies Act back in January.
Expanding enforcement significantly. Even reports of targeting students for deportation under that.
That's what the analysis points to, yes.
Okay, so for supporters, this is straightforward. Fulfilling campaign promises. Securing borders, prioritizing national security. It resonates strongly with the conservative base.
An America First approach.
Exactly. And politically, it's seen as a way to rally support for Republican candidates looking ahead to the 2026 midterms.
But what about the pushback? We heard from opponents like Rep. Steve Cohen. What are their main arguments?
Critics say these actions trample on due process. that they target legal residents sometimes without enough evidence. And they worry it chills free speech, especially on campuses, if students fear deportation for speaking out.
And the legal challenges.
They're already happening. Some measures, like the attempt to end birthright citizenship, has been blocked by courts. And using that Alien Enemies Act,
That old law.
yeah, from 1798, meant for wartime. Using it in peacetime for immigration enforcement has drawn criticism from both sides of the aisle, actually, seen as executive overreach.
So, looking ahead politically, what does this very aggressive immigration stance mean for the future?
Well, it's likely to polarize the electorate even more. It definitely shores up Republican-based support, no question. But it risks alienating moderate voters, minority communities, creates deeper divides.
And the court battles.
Those could drag on for years, clogging the system. They might even lead to major Supreme Court rulings that redefine immigration law for decades. And internationally.
Chain of relations.
Potentially, yeah. Particularly with allies in the Middle East, Africa, where some of these visa suspensions hit hardest. It impacts diplomacy.
Okay, next up. Global health and international relations, another area of significant shifts.
Big shifts, pulling out of international agreements.
Right, orders initiating withdrawal from the World Health Organization, the WHO, and the Paris Agreement on Climate. Right on January 20th.
And then cutting UN funding.
Early February. An EO pulling funding from UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, and starting reviews of U.S. involvement in UNESCO and the UN Human Rights Council.
Okay, for voters who are skeptical of these big global institutions, these actions really hit home. Reinforces that narrative of U.S. sovereignty, America first.
And aligns with Project 2025.
Directly. Project 2025 called for ending what it termed blind support for international organizations. So this fits right into that playbook.
But what are the global implications? Exiting the WHO, pulling out of Paris. What are the potential consequences?
Well, global health experts are worried. Leaving the WHO could weaken U.S. influence in fighting pandemics, coordinating vaccine rollouts, things that are, global challenges.
And the Paris Agreement.
Similar concern. It could isolate the U.S. in climate talks, reduce our diplomatic leverage on a really critical issue. Allies, like the EU, have already voiced serious concerns. It could strain partnerships like NATO, even affect trade talks down the line. Creates friction.
So, stepping back, if we connect this to the bigger picture, what does it mean for America's standing in the world?
The U.S. might score some points domestically with isolationist voters, but the report suggests the bigger risk is a significant loss of soft power globally. Influence, leadership.
And if the U.S. steps back?
Others might step in. Reduced U.S. participation could create a vacuum, potentially emboldening rivals like China to take on more leadership roles. That could fundamentally reshape global governance, alliances, everything.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the report even mentions the Russia-Ukraine war outlook, predicting an end by mid-2026 based on Trump's negotiations, might depend heavily on China's role, which just adds another layer of complexity if the U.S. is less engaged multilaterally.
Okay, one recurring theme here is Project 2025. You've mentioned it a few times.
It keeps coming up in the analysis, yeah.
The report says a lot of these orders, deregulation, immigration, the federal workforce changes, really mirror proposals laid out in Project 2025, even if the president himself has publicly distanced himself from it.
Right, and groups like the Heritage Foundation, other conservative organizations, they openly praise this alignment, especially the parts aimed at dismantling the so-called administrative state.
Strengthening ties with conservative think tanks.
And donors, exactly. It provides a coherent conservative policy roadmap.
But on the other hand, we're hearing really strong criticisms from Democrats, civil liberties groups. What's their take?
They argue that Project 2025's influence is actually a threat to democratic norms. Things like the mass firings of civil servants or the reported DOJ investigations into universities. Critics see these as authoritarian moves.
And legal challenges are ongoing.
Yes, citing things like unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination, raising fundamental questions about the balance of power.
This raises a really important question, then, about the future of governance itself and maybe even democracy in the U.S.
It's a central tension. Aligning with Project 2025 could definitely solidify Republican policy control, push a very specific conservative agenda forward. But the risk is alienating moderates, maybe even some Republicans, and galvanizing Democratic opposition for 2026-2028.
And what if the courts step in?
That's the big unknown.
Yeah.
If key orders get struck down, the whole agenda could face major setbacks. They'd have to rely on Congress, which is always less certain. So the real question is, can this kind of top-down reshaping of government withstand the legal and political pushback.
Okay, let's shift one more time. Let's turn to the socio-cultural implications. This gets into education, values, even tech.
Yeah, the so-called culture war issues.
Exactly. Let's start with education. We saw an EO in late January aimed at ending what it called radical indoctrination in K-12 schools, banning certain ideological teachings.
And in the history curriculum focus.
Right, late March. An order on restoring truth and sanity to American history. It reinstated the 1776 project specifically to counter the 1619 project.
And the university funding one.
Mid-April, an EO on campus accountability, threatening to withhold federal funds from universities deemed hostile under Title VI, specifically citing anti-Semitism concerns.
Okay, so for conservatives who feel that schools and universities have become too focused on woke ideology, these orders are seen as a necessary correction.
Like the 1776 project.
Exactly. The Heritage Foundation praises it as defending traditional American values, traditional history. And parents worried about progressive curricula might really support these kinds of measures.
But what are the counter-arguments? From academics, civil liberties folks?
Well, historians and many academics see these actions as a direct attack on academic freedom. They argue it distorts history for political ends and targeting universities with funding cuts.
That's already led to lawsuits.
Yeah, alleging viewpoint discrimination. Harvard and Columbia apparently successfully challenged some initial cuts. And the report mentions individual students like Mahmoud Khalil, Ranjani Srinivasan, facing deportation threats. That sends a real chill across campuses regarding dissent.
And using Title VI that way.
Yeah, critics argue interpreting Title VI, which prohibits race and national origin discrimination to police campus speech, particularly around anti-Semitism, could end up stifling legitimate academic debate and free expression on a whole range of topics.
What's fascinating here is just how deeply these issues cut. Beliefs about truth, history, education. What are the potential long-term ripple effects?
Well, these policies could definitely deepen the cultural divides we already see. Conservative areas might adopt these revised curricula, while liberal areas resist fiercely.
And the legal battles continue.
Oh yeah, they could set huge precedents for federal control over education, potentially reshaping academic freedom nationwide for years. And while tackling anti-Semitism might get some bipartisan nods initially,
There's a risk.
a risk it gets perceived as primarily targeting pro-Palestinian speech, which would just pour fuel on the fire of campus polarization. It really changes the whole landscape of what gets taught and discussed.
Okay, moving on to religious and social values. Another hot button area. An EO from early February focused on eradicating anti-Christian bias, setting up a religious liberty commission,
Right, and around the same time, the one about keeping men out of women's sports.
reinforcing gender-based sports policies, and then back in late January, one titled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation, banning certain medical procedures for minors.
So these orders clearly resonate with religious conservatives. They reinforce traditional views on gender, and they aim to bolster religious freedoms. That Religious Liberty Commission, for instance, is seen as a needed check against perceived secular overreach.
But what are the concerns from, say, LGBTQ plus advocates or civil liberties groups?
Well, LGBTQ plus advocates argue these measures directly discriminate against transgender people, limiting healthcare access, barring participation in sports. And civil liberties groups worry that focusing specifically on anti-Christian bias could end up marginalizing other faiths, raising First Amendment flags about church-state separation.
Codifying discrimination, critics might say.
That's the argument, yeah, that the language effectively writes discrimination into policy under the cover of protecting certain values.
This brings up that fundamental tension again. Individual rights versus societal norms. How might this play out?
Well, these orders could certainly strengthen conservative cultural influence, especially at the state level, but they're also likely to alienate younger, more progressive demographics.
And the courts?
Legal challenges are almost guaranteed, particularly around transgender rights. They'll likely escalate, maybe all the way to the Supreme Court, setting national precedents. And that focus on religious liberty could really embolden similar state laws, deepening that red state, blue state divide on social issues. Expect more intense cultural battles.
Okay, finally, let's touch on media and technology. Always changing, always controversial.
Never a dull moment there.
We saw an EO in early April delaying enforcement regarding TikTok, extending the deadline for the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act to mid-June 2025.
Buying more time on that one.
Seems like it. And then a broader EO on big tech, which the report says aligns with Project 2025, proposing significant antitrust enforcement, but explicitly for socio-political reasons.
Okay, so conservatives tend to see these moves as necessary, curbing what they view as big tech's liberal bias. It fits right into that Project 2025 goal of tackling wokeism in media and online.
And the talk delay.
That might be seen as pragmatic. Address the national security concerns, sure, but maybe avoid an immediate ban that would anger a lot of younger users.
So, what are the concerns from critics about these tech orders?
Well, the idea of using antitrust law based on socio-political grounds rather than traditional economic competition metrics, critics say that's a dangerous road. It could threaten free speech, stifle innovation if tech companies fear political retaliation.
And AI policy.
That's a big gap the report highlights. A lack of clear AI policy in Project 2025 seems mirrored in the administration's current actions, which raises huge concerns about privacy, misinformation, and the U.S. potentially falling behind in regulating AI effectively compared to, say, Europe.
So, what does this all mean for our information ecosystem, for tech regulation moving forward?
That push against big tech could really shake up online discourse,
Right.
maybe lead to a more fragmented internet. But the lack of clear rules on AI and content moderation might leave the U.S. playing catch-up globally.
And the culture wars.
They'll likely intensify online. Battles over censorship, free speech, platform responsibility. It could further erode public trust in media and online information. The big question is whether these actions actually foster a healthier online environment or just inject more politics into tech regulation.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground in this deep dive. Executive orders touching everything from global trade and energy to classrooms and social media.
It's a lot, affects nearly every aspect of policy.
Let's try to pull it all together. What's the big takeaway from the report's analysis?
Well, the report's conclusion basically suggests the next 3 to 5 years are likely to be pretty tense both domestically and internationally as these orders continue to reshape U.S. policy.
So, potential economic growth in some areas?
Yeah, maybe in those targeted sectors like domestic manufacturing or fossil fuels, but balanced against significant risks. Risks of global isolation due to trade and foreign policy shifts and deepening cultural divides here at home. That could really challenge national unity.
And whether these orders ultimately succeed.
It really depends. On navigating legal challenges, a lot of these will end up in court. On shifts in public opinion. And on how the rest of the world reacts. There's just a huge amount of uncertainty about the long-term impact on, everyday life.
That's a perfect place to leave it for some reflection. As you listening, think about this vast range of executive orders impacting trade, energy, education, social values, technology. How might they fundamentally reshape not just the policies coming out of Washington, but your daily life? The choices available to you, your community? What are the unexpected ripple effects you might start to see playing out around you in the coming months and years?
It's definitely something to keep watching.
Absolutely. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep making your own connections as these stories continue to develop. Until next time.